Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. I got an email in from an old friend, Gillian, who's been with the site for many, many years in actual fact. And she was saying that being from the States, she's just doesn't understand Brexit. She's partly watched some of my videos and stuff like that and read up about it, but she still can't get her head around it. So she's just wondering if I could maybe try and explain what Brexit's all about. So this is my attempt to do so. I'm not going to maybe go into complete details and figures and everything like that, but I'm going to try and give a broad approach. Essentially, the problem came in that Britain's always had an uneasy relationship with Europe. And I think that goes back to the fact that we've had two world wars around Europe. And obviously that's cost Britain a huge amount of money over the many years. So the question really is, why did we join in the first place? Well, we joined the Common Market, as it was called then, which was a common trade organisation. And it sounded like a good idea, so we voted to join the Common Market. And after various starts, because I know France under de Gaulle didn't want us in and continued to refuse us entry. But eventually we got in and we gave a referendum and it said, yeah, we'll join the Common Market. Sounded like a good idea to us at the time. The trouble is, over many years, the Common Market ended up becoming the European Economic Community and then the European Union, the EU. And it started to be political rather than just trade. I mean, one of the major examples I can tell you about is our fishing industry in Britain. A lot of our fishing industry is small ships from coastal communities going out to fish and bringing back their catch. But the Common Fisheries Policy started to put heavy restrictions on what fish you could take, and it put basically disastrous conditions on fishing, which allowed most of the European countries to come into our waters and take whatever they wanted with their big ships, their big economic clout basically, and it lost us over 100,000 jobs in the fishing industry and support services. And a lot of our coastal communities were totally wrecked as a result. Now they're kind of wee touristy areas, they no longer have an industry there. And in fact, if you went to legscotland.com/Thompson, you'll see that David Thompson has written a couple of books, and one of which is the fishing industry one. And I highly recommend you read the first chapter of that book, because in it, bearing in mind that David's father was a fishing captain, and he basically fished around the coast into Ireland and up further up into the North Sea and so forth. And David became a fishing captain in his turn and ended up being one of the premier people in the fishing industry worldwide, because he worked in some 60 countries of the world representing the United Nations for the fishing industry, both at sea and in inward waterways. He's a real expert, that guy. But anyway, when you go through that first chapter of his book, he's taking you through his local fishing village of Lossiemouth on the Murray Firth in Scotland. And he's going through pointing out that this is what is there now, but what used to be was this. And he actually takes you through the whole town to show the massive change. Because Lossiemouth used to actually build fishing vessels at one time. Obviously that industry's dead now. And he showed you where, the engine works were. That's obviously gone now. And so as you can see, just by following through that first chapter, you'll see the massive changes that the EU caused for that one community. Now it's a small microcosm, of course, but at least it gives you a feel for what the EU has done adversely for the United Kingdom. And can remind you, the United Kingdom is England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, that's important to notice because Ireland used to be with the UK, but Southern Ireland got its independence many years ago now. So Southern Ireland is now an independent country in its own right. And it's also a member of the EU. It joined the common market when we joined, because they still see the United Kingdom as their certainly a very important part of their trade. But in Northern Ireland, which is mostly Protestant, and mostly was the home of the Scots-Irish, who basically mostly came from the borders of Scotland, is Protestant, whereas Southern Ireland is Catholic. And hence the major reason why Northern Ireland didn't want to be ruled by a Catholic country, essentially. And that's why they decided they wanted to remain independent and part of the United Kingdom, because of the Protestant majority there. Whereas in the south it was hugely Catholic majority, huge Catholic majority there. So, well, there's also the problem that in the EU there's a lot of inequality going on. It's still right that the Eastern European countries are having heavy unemployment, low wages and everything. But in the EU you had free migration. So if you're in an EU member country, you automatically could move to any country in the world, any country within the EU, and get social security, better living, all kinds of things like that. So we got a whole flood. I think over 3 million people came from the EU countries into Britain after that. And a lot of them were quite happy to get low wages in Britain because it was actually like high wages back where they came from. So it was a great move to come to the United Kingdom. The problem there is that there's a lot of people, especially in England, were being hit because they were willing to do work for a lot less than the local people were willing to do. And of course, because the local people had homes and everything that had to be paid for, they needed the higher wages to keep their standard of living up. But because of the cheap EU immigrants coming in, they were lowering these wages, because why should a company pay higher wages to some, just to keep them in work, when they could employ lower wage people that would make more profits for their company? I mean, it's an economic factor, that. So that's where in England immigration became an issue. It was never an issue in Scotland because we need low wage people, because the Scots themselves will not pick berries in the field. Strawberries, raspberries, apples, all the soft fruits and everything. So Scotland needed those low-income workers to come in to help the farmers, essentially. So that's why we kind of see things a little bit differently from a Scottish point of view than you do perhaps from maybe England and Wales point of view. So over years, I don't think ever that most of the British people have never felt absolutely comfortable by basically being told what to do by the bigger EU. We don't like being told what to do. We're quite happy to have a discussion, and if we come to equitable arrangements, that's fine. But increasingly, EU laws were taking over from UK laws. And that was where the problem was starting to come in. As I say, the common fisheries policy was a disaster for Britain. Total disaster. And I think a lot of people knew people. I mean, 100,000 people lost jobs because of the way the EU did things. It's like the steel plants in Scotland. We had a major steel plant, but it was closed down because there was overproduction of steel within the EU, and the EU decided it was better to close the big Scottish plant. I mean, there's lots of little things like that are going on that was hitting Britain for six, essentially. So David Cameron realised there was an unrest, essentially, within Britain about being a member of the EU. And of course we had UKIP came along, which was Nigel Farage with the United Kingdom Independence Party, hence UKIP, and he said it's time we got out. And he was starting to win seats for Parliament, and it was starting to affect the Tories, because people were saying, I agree, I want out of the EU as well, please, so I'm going to vote UKIP and not Tory. So what happened was, it was getting to the point where the Conservatives were having difficulty looking forward to having a majority anymore. And so David Cameron said, well look, vote for Conservatives and we'll give you a referendum on being a member of the EU. And because of that, he got a majority. Now what happened? We got the referendum we were promised, and essentially we got the highest turnout we've ever had in the entire history of Britain. More people voted, over 80% voted in that referendum. And I say, we've never had anything like that number of people voting before, ever in our history. And basically the Leavers won by 52% to 48%. And from my looking at it, if you look at the fear stories that are on, that just because we vote to leave the EU, we will lose 500,000 jobs, salaries will be not because people will leave the UK in droves for the EU countries. I mean, the fear stories were horrendous at the time. And every leader that we had, including Barack Obama, came over, said it was a bad idea to leave the EU. And if we did, we'd go to the end of the queue for a free trade deal with the US. The Bank of England came out with it, the International Monetary Fund. Everyone that was anyone said it was a bad idea for us to leave. But the British people, on the whole, said, we don't believe these scare stories, and we're going to vote to leave. Now, in actual fact, if there hadn't been such horrendous fear stories, I believe we could have had at least 60% to 40% that would have voted to leave. But because of these fear stories, clearly some people were a bit worried, thinking, well, I could lose my job or whatever, you know, so maybe I better vote just to remain, you know. But 52% had the courage to ignore these fear stories and voted to leave. Now, as a result of that, what happened? Well, absolutely none of those fear stories came about. In fact, we have the highest level of employment we've ever had in our history right now. In other words, Britain is doing fantastically well. We've reduced our debt. We're getting bigger foreign investment coming into this country. I mean, the country is actually in a very good financial position right now. And that's despite all those horrendous fear stories. And the British Treasury has been coming out with doom, gloom and despondency, as has the Bank of England. Yet every time they put out their projections on horrendous figures that are going to come out, when it's actually come to the fact where we actually get the results, we've been way, way better than any of their forecasts. So the Bank of England and the Treasury and the government are both totally compromised as liars. They've just been lying to us. And I fundamentally believe that the British people have now got to the point where we just don't believe you anymore. And we want out. And that's what they voted for, was to come out. And what happened? Everyone was shocked, of course. But then the next big parliamentary thing was like, I mean, we got Theresa May, the Prime Minister, in, which was a massive disaster. She was clearly, totally and utterly incapable of doing Brexit negotiations. She's definitely the worst Prime Minister we've ever had in our whole history. She was a total disaster. But the thing is, in Parliament, with a vast majority in Parliament, all houses, both Labour, Tory, everyone, basically signed Article 50, which was basically the official document that was advising the EU that Britain now wants to leave. And the laws of the EU show that you have to submit Article 50 with the terms and conditions that are in that article to leave in 2 years' time. And actually, I just put up on the site today a paper from one of the major QCs who's continuing to look at the legal aspects of this. And if you look at it, let me just remind me where the link is to that. Hang on a second. Yeah, it's Stanley Brodie QC invites attention to something which others overlooked. Says the actual wording of Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union, which regulates the departure of member states from the EU. At the moment, it's the first story I've got in my What's New page on Life to Scotland. The thing here is that legally we're actually out of the EU right now, and he's saying that because we're still in, it's actually illegal. But if you read his paper, it makes a lot of common sense. Now, so why are we having so many problems now with Brexit? It's basically people don't want to leave the EU because under the EU made decisions for us. We couldn't sign a trade agreement without the EU overriding and signing onto it. And because of that, I think Britain ended up having 4 trade representatives or trade negotiators, whereas the EU have hundreds of them. So basically, if you wanted to trade with Britain, you had to trade with the EU first, and then you could come into Britain. And so who wants to do that? You know, I mean, you couldn't go to Britain and say, I want to do a deal with you, because Britain would say, well, sorry, you'll have to stick to the EU regulations on this, so but go through the EU and we'll be happy to do a trade deal. I mean, would the United States stand up for that? Of course the big well wouldn't. And no self-respecting country with any pride would give in their negotiating stance in the world to someone else. And that's what's happening. So, the thing about this, how this Brexit has got to be a mess, is basically we've got a lot of people in Parliament that have no pride in country and no faith in the country and its businesses. That's the nut of it. They think we can't run ourselves anymore. What I've been saying, if you think that, do not stand for Parliament, and voters, make sure you deselect those no-hopers. Because we only want people in our government that have faith in the country and pride in the country and want to go forth to have a great future for us in the future. So all of those people that want to remain are cowards, don't like Britain, they're not have any pride in country, they want to be told what to do, they're useless, they're a waste of time, these people, total waste of time. And if you think about it, where does our future lie? I mean, this is the other aspect of it. 90% of the growth is coming from outside of the EU. All the major trade is going to Asia. That's where the big population centres are. India, China. But India is in the Commonwealth, which is a bit different from what China is. So I've been saying, we want to do free trade, we need to re-engage with the Commonwealth countries. Because we ditched the Commonwealth when we joined the EU. If I remember rightly, I think there was 5 years of transitionary mechanisms, so the Commonwealth wouldn't be just hit upon when we left, because we always had preferential trade with the Commonwealth. No longer have that. It has to be EU sanctified now. So all I've been saying is that if we leave the EU, we can now negotiate our own free trade agreements. And Australia, Canada, New Zealand, commonly called the CAN-UZ group, which includes the UK as well, they are basically very equal in laws, output, they all speak English, you know, I mean, it's a common tongue with us, common laws. All our parliaments are in the same mode. I mean, they're so similar, it isn't true. And if you go to any of these countries, you wouldn't have any problems in speaking with anyone in those countries at all. They all speak our language. And they all have basically the same laws. So you're not going to fall foul of something because we've got pretty much common laws all over the place. So there's no problem in dealing with any of those countries. It's almost like dealing with your own country, in fact. Whereas if you go to the EU, you've got the currency problems, because the EU decided to go into the euro, which has not been good, because, I mean, that's why Italy and Greece, these countries, are having so many problems, because they're part of the euro, they can't devalue the currency, and that's one of the ways you can make your currency more efficient and your country better, is devaluing your currency. I mean, Britain has done that in the past, devalued the currency, and it did a huge benefit to the country. In fact, that's partly why we're doing so well right now, because of this Brexit disaster. The sterling has been put down in value against the dollar and the euros and so forth, but that's given us a competitive edge, which has actually meant our exports are booming now. You know, we're actually doing extremely well. And if Italy could only have that option, Italy would be far better off, but they're stuck with the EU. Luckily, we had a veto at that time, and we vetoed us joining into the Euro scheme. We stood out of it, and thank God we did it, otherwise we'd be a disaster right now as a country. And so it's things like that I think any right-thinking person that's got pride in country and faith in our people and our businesses believe we can do much better outside of the EU, which is basically strangling us. And if you look at our trade with the rest of the world, we're actually in a small surplus with them, whereas the EU, we have something like a 50 billion deficit on trade. So the EU are selling us 50 billion more goods than they're buying from us. It's a huge trade imbalance, and it's all down to the way the EU structure the systems. And we're also paying a huge amount of money every year to be part of the EU, and that money could be going into Britain. And that's why I think where a lot of people have a problem is they can see how Britain could do much better outside the EU, but it appears that far too many British people don't understand that. And that's where I have a lot of frustration myself. I mean, in the moment, the people gave clear instructions to our Parliament, get out of the EU. But our parliamentary MPs can't make up their minds. They're convinced this is a bad deal. And I'm thinking it's because all of a sudden they're going to have to make decisions for themselves. But they're too stupid to be able to do that. They're pathetic. These people that have no faith in the country, no faith in their businesses, they just want to stay in the EU, be safe. We'll be safe in the EU. It doesn't matter whether we'll go down the tubes as a country because of the EU. I mean, the EU is going down. It's becoming less relevant in the world. And if you look at the EU countries, I mean, Germany, believe you me, Germany has been putting maybe, 0.5% into the NATO defence funds. And America's been kicking up the extra 1.5% on their behalf. I mean, Germany is the richest country in Europe, yet they defraud the United States of 1.5%. That's billions in the defence budget for NATO. France does the same. It's only about Britain and I think a couple of other smaller countries that actually commit to the 2% of their GDP going to defence. I think Estonia is there as well. Estonia is just a wee country. But nevertheless, they put their 2 and a bit % in, as does Britain. But Germany, the rich, wealthy one, they put 0.5% in. And so Trump was absolutely right to call them out in big time. And it's my belief that if Britain leaves the EU on a no-deal declaration, I think you're going to see the EU getting hit by massive tariffs from the United States. I think the United States only held off because they're hoping Britain would come out, and therefore their imposed tariffs on the EU wouldn't affect Britain. I mean, and Trump has been saying, as a lot of other people have said in the States, that we're ready to do a great free trade deal with the States. And this things like they talk about chlorinated chicken. I mean, you've got the right not to buy a product. So cheap chlorinated chicken come in, which America's happily eating, no problem at all. So you have the choice in Britain of buying a cheaper chlorinated chicken or a more expensive non-chlorinated chicken. But you've got the right to do whatever you want. But we've got a lot of poor people in the UK that don't have the money. I'm quite sure a lot of them would love to buy the cheaper chlorinated chicken. You know, it's just ridiculous, to be honest with you, all the things they're talking about. I mean, a lot of them don't know what they're talking about. They're just, I don't know, their minds have just gone. They're not willing to look at the situation. But as I say, to me, there's no downside to leaving the EU. But for many, they're scared. They're really scared about leaving the EU because they don't think Britain can stand up for itself in the world. And that's the unfortunate problem that we've got. I say, one, our MPs are basically cowards and a waste of time, most of them. Not all of them, but most of them. That's why Nigel Farage has come out and said, look, these MPs aren't listening to you from Labour and Tory. They're just not listening to the people who said we want out. So that's why I've launched my new party, the Brexit Party. And 6 weeks after he launched it, he won 32% of the EU vote, by far the largest winner in the European elections. Because we hadn't left on time, we were forced to participate in these elections. And the huge word came through that the Brexit Party's won 32%. I think the Conservatives got something like, I can't remember, 9% or something like that. Well trounced. They came bottom of the list. Or almost bottom. But, you know, I think that's the fact that now we're still in, these MPs we have that are just useless are still in denial. You know, what don't they understand? The British people want out, and I believe increasingly want out. I mean, Labour's a disaster. They have no real idea or plan, apart from the fact, let's put the decision back to the people. Well, what didn't they understand the first time? And I think if they did put it back to people, they would get totally embarrassed and they'd be dead as a party. Because basically, even more people will come out and say, we want out. We're sick of it up, you stupid politicians. They don't listen to us. And now we're getting politicians being deselected. We've got one already that's been deselected. There's the Peterborough by-election as a result of that. And we're hoping that on Friday, when the votes go through, the first Brexit MP for Westminster will win that election. We're all hoping that's going to be the case. Because we believe if we had a general election, the Brexit Party would be the overall winner and would be asked to form the next government, which it might do if it worked with some of the Conservatives, maybe, I don't know. But I mean, the whole thing is taking back control of your own country, having pride in your own country. And what's wrong with being proud of your country and having faith in its institutions and businesses? What's wrong with that? Nothing, in my view. I just believe we could do so much better outside of the EU. I mean, you can see France. France might be the reason we leave at the end of the day, because the French president's sick fed up of this Brexit stuff going on. And he's got lots of troubles at home, as has Germany now. I mean, the coalition in Germany is just broken up. So they're going to have to work Merkel's going to have to work as a minority government. It's a disaster as far as that goes. You know, so I mean, Europe's got a ton of political problems as well. But we want to stick with them? I don't think so. I can't see any reason for doing it. But essentially, Brexit is all about pride in country, faith in country, and let's get on with it, guys, and let's deal with the world again. And as I say, I believe, I mean, the Commonwealth right now is probably the largest trading bloc in the world that people don't seem to realise. I mean, who have you got in the Commonwealth? You've got India, which is the second most populated country in the world, and is doing very well, thank you very much. Then we've got, obviously, Britain, but there's Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all three very good, stable countries doing very well. We've got African countries that are part of the Commonwealth. We've got Pacific American countries. Other countries in Asia are part of the Commonwealth. If you actually total up the Commonwealth countries, and to say define that, if you go to my index page on the website scotland.com, scroll down a little bit, you'll see Scotland's Future, a link for Scotland's Future. If you click on that, then go to the bottom of that page, you'll see a link to Scottish Innovation Party. And if you click on that, you'll see there's an entry for the Commonwealth. And in that, you can look at all the countries that are in the Commonwealth. And the Queen is head of state for all the Commonwealth countries. You know, so, I mean, she's the head of the Commonwealth, the Queen. And Prince Charles has already been accepted as the next one when the Queen passes away, which hopefully will be a few years yet. But nevertheless, she's in her 90s, so who knows. But anyway, Prince Charles has already been elected to succeed her. So, you know, there we are. We've got a great end to the Commonwealth. So, I mean, I think with the USA and with the Commonwealth countries, we've got a phenomenal future just with them alone. But of course we'll trade with other countries as well. I mean, whether we'll do that much with China, I don't know, because they are obviously a dictatorship. And we don't seem to do too well with dictatorships. There's the problems on Hawaii, you know, this technology giant in China that they think's run by the Chinese government, and therefore the big argument is, should any of the NATO countries actually allow Hawaii in, because it could be a conduit for spying and stuff like that. It's a legitimate concern. So I mean, you know, when you just look at the things we could do together, I mean, with the Commonwealth and with the USA, we're a phenomenal grouping in the world. Phenomenal grouping in the world. And Trump himself is part Scottish, because his mother was from Stornoway, and he's proud of his Scottish roots, even though Scotland doesn't like him. I mean, there's actually a very good article that I put up just recently, and maybe folks in America would be interested in reading it. It's, let me have a quick look now. Yes, Scottish and Scots Diaspora News, again from my index page, and you'll see the last article I put up was, let's have a quick look. Oh, I haven't put it up there, that's interesting. Yeah, what's new? No, I haven't put it up, but I will put it up. It's basically, there's an article I saw which was giving something like 30 reasons why Trump is good for, has done so well. And it's actually listing a whole lot of things that they've done. I must put that up. I don't know why it hasn't gone up. Let me just have a look and see if it... 30 reasons why we welcome you, Mr. President. It's from Conservative Women. So in fact, let me just, I obviously put that up but didn't save it. So I'll now save it and publish it. File, publish. Here we go. So it's now Scott's News feed that you'll find that particular article. So I'll just refresh that and just make sure it's gone up. Let's check that. Yep, it's up. 30 reasons why we welcome you, Mr. President. This is from the Conservative Women's website. So, I mean, that's... And if you look at the 30 things that he's done, I mean, I wasn't aware of him doing all that in America. And I would suggest perhaps a lot of Americans have no idea of what he's achieved either. So I think you should read that story if you're an American. But certainly, I think whoever you are, you should read that. Because I think what a lot of people have said about Mr. Trump is that while maybe personally he's not to their liking, the fact of the matter is he's a proud American. And he's done very well for America. And apparently the latest poll that's come out, so Nigel Farage tells me, is that his approval ratings have gone to 48% now. So he's actually more popular than a lot of other presidents have been. So I think people are starting to realise that he's actually good for the United States. And he's a businessman. He's not one of these craven politicians who get everything wrong all the time. He's a businessman. He wants results, and he's getting results. And if you look at those 30 reasons, you'll see the results he's been getting from people. It made a hell of a difference. So anyway, so back to Brexit. I think the whole point is that Britain was, most British people were a bit fed up being told what to do by the EU. And we wanted to take back control so that we can make our own decisions. And essentially, 52% wanted out, 48% decided to remain. But I believe a portion of the people that voted to remain were so scared with these massive fear stories coming out that they decided not to chance the leave side of things. So I think despite these horrendous stories and everyone telling us that we had to remain, that unfortunately a lot of people were persuaded not to vote leave because they were scared. But everything is proved, everything that was predicted has not come to pass. And in fact the opposite. We've boomed since that decision. We've done brilliantly. And that's why I believe if there was another referendum, I think the Leave vote would be even stronger than it's ever been. Because all these cowards, and I literally call them cowards, have been proved wrong. And as I say, if you're a British Member of Parliament, you should have pride in country and faith in the British people and our businesses. If you don't have that, you shouldn't be allowed to even stand for Parliament. Anyway, so as I say, I think we want to take back control so that we can go out in the world and do our own thing. We won't have to kowtow to the EU for our laws and all of that kind of stuff. We can do our own trade deals. We can make our own mistakes, for that matter. You know, it's not saying everything's going to be plain sailing. We'll make mistakes. But even if we left on what's called WTO terms, the thing is that there are hundreds of countries that actually work with the EU on WTO terms, as does America, would you believe? America deals with Europe on WTO terms, because America and Europe don't have a free trade agreement together, so they deal in WTO terms. So why won't Britain continue to deal with Europe? Of course we will. There's too many products they want of ours, and there's too many products they want to sell into us. For them to say, oh well, if you've left, go away, we don't want to deal with you anymore. Because that would cripple their economies. They need to keep selling to Britain. So, you know, I mean, just because we leave doesn't mean say we're going to be enemies. We can be friends, but, you know, be respected. And to get respect, you have to be an independent country and able to do your own deals and stuff like that. So there's no confusion in my mind about Brexit. Brexit is great for Britain, great for the United Kingdom, and let me remind you that on this, how disastrous it's been is because we had a useless Prime Minister. Theresa May has been pathetic. She decided, she was persuaded, she went for another general election, which she didn't need to run, by the way, because she already had a good majority. I think it was 34th of a majority, but she thought she could get 100 majority by going for another election. Ended up, she lost the majority. It was a minority, and she has to rely on the DUP, which is the Northern Ireland Parliament, or party, to support her. Because without their support, she couldn't have formed a government. And of course, if you bother to look at the election she ran, it was pathetic. It started off all about Brexit, and she had 20, 30, 40% lead in the polls. But then she talks about starting to say, well, if you've got dementia or any of that unfortunate disease, we don't want to support you with the National Health Service. You have to start paying for that privately. I mean, she came out with absolutely really stupid comments like that. And of course people said, well, hop you, love, if that's what your attitude is. And they told her where to go. So ever since then, she's been mortally damaged. And of course, when she went back with her foreign with a trade agreement that she negotiated. This is not the withdrawal agreement, by the way. This is the terms that we would leave the EU were being negotiated. She did such a lousy job that the highest level of people in Parliament ever actually voted down her bill to support with the withdrawal agreement. I mean, she lost by over 200 votes. I mean, everyone voted against her. And she tried it 2 more times and got voted down heavily each time. Unfortunately, the 3rd time she tried, she lost by about 60 votes, I think. So she got some of them back. And I think that's why we're having problems now with the Conservative Party's leadership elections, because a lot of people that are saying we must leave actually voted for her 3rd attempt. And so they were damaged. Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg are among those people that were willing to accept the deal. They were wrong. And that's why Nigel Farage has come out and why he's just blowing everyone apart. And I say we're quite confident now the Brexit Party is going to be the largest party at the next election. I think the Tories and the Labour are going to be destroyed. The Lib Dems might do well, but I think the Lib Dems are more a protest vote rather than a real vote, to be honest. It's just that if you don't like the Labour or Conservative people and you're a bit dodgy about Brexit, who are you going to vote for? The Lib Dems are the only other option you've got. Or, of course, in Scotland, you've got the SNP, which is a pathetic organisation as well. I mean, an independent Scotland run by the SNP is a disaster waiting to happen. If Scotland genuinely wants an independent country, they need to get new, different people elected. Because by continuing to elect the SNP, they'll never get independence in a million years. These people that are running a country at the moment is terrible. So, anyway. So that's my opinion. I think the core of it is either you have pride in country and faith in your business people and the people of Britain, or you don't. Those people that have faith want to leave the EU. Those people that don't have faith want to remain. And as I say, I have no time for Remainers. I think they're just cowards and really stupid people on the whole. I can see no benefits being in the EU at all. We're much better on our own, doing our own thing. So, I don't know if that's made it any clearer to you, because obviously I'm biased, because I want us out of the EU. So obviously I'm going to try and persuade you that that's the right decision. But all I can say is, on the other side, all we're getting is lies, lies and more lies from everyone that wants to remain. You know, and I just don't accept that. So anyway, there you go. And I say it might interest you to know that those that want to leave, on the whole, like Donald Trump as well. So there you go. Okay, so hope that's maybe explained something. I don't know if it has or not. I've tried to be kind of blatant and kind of, well, reasonably honest, I would say. I mean, I believe everything I've said to you. That's why I'm saying it. But I say I am biased because I can see great benefits for the country leaving the EU. And I just can't wait to get to that so we can go on and do these trade deals with America and the Commonwealth. So there you go. Hope that helps, Gillian. If it doesn't, leave me another email.